what I'm here today to talk to you about is to actually expand on what Marie introduced to you and give you maybe a model, a tool of what worked fairly successfully in the poultry industry to have even a faster response time. You might think it wasn't very fast because it was March to June and basically till August till barns were repopulated, but it could have been much, much, much worse had we not had some of these communication bridges already established in the poultry industry. So the mission of extension, cooperative extension, has existed in the United States for 105 years. We are lucky at the University of Minnesota. We are celebrating our 110th anniversary this year. Our role is to provide education to encourage and empower behavior change for the producers in the state of Minnesota. For you that are not in Minnesota, it's to help empower those producers in your state, whatever commodity that they raise. It is not our intention to force this behavior change. We are not regulators, we are educators. We strongly believe that education will lead to better decision making. I've spent the last 2 summers teaching biosecurity to 4-Hers in 9 different species. Their learning gains are immense. They have learned so much because we are just providing that education so that they can make better decisions at home when they're going to fairs, when they're coming home from fairs. And hopefully they're going to be that agent of change and convince mom and dad and grandma and grandpa to make some of those changes as well. So I'm not here to preach to you about extension, but I'm going to preach to you how extension can be part of the whole system. Are any of you familiar with systems thinking, a term that maybe has been introduced to you in the past? They commonly use an iceberg as a model to describe systems thinking. How much of an iceberg can we physically see with the naked eye above the surface of the water? 10%. Where's the other 90%? Below the surface. It's what helps make that base, and that's what we are all a part of, is that base of how this response can look. So as Dr. Cardona mentioned, I'm here in this position because of this. In 2015, to reiterate, Minnesota accounted for 47% of the confirmed cases of highly pathogenic avian influenza in the United States. We lost 10% of our turkey inventory, about 4 million laying eggs on 110 farm sites on 23 of our Minnesota counties. How we can respond to this as a whole industry, whether you're a regulator, producer, or a veterinarian, is this partnership. Okay? An efficient response requires a partnership. You can see this race car, so I'm going to turn you into the Mario Andretti's and the Danica Patricks of the world. Regulatory agencies have the car, and they are the driver. They have control of eradicating that disease as soon as possible. Industry, we are the specialists in that engine. We went to school. We spent time in North Carolina, who also happens to be the NASCAR capital of the world, including the pig industry. Disease eradication can be much more efficient for the regulators if the industry has some input and some stakeholder information. There's shared knowledges. Industry has knowledge. We're constantly providing new research. We're having new discoveries. Regulatory rules are changing all the time, right? Combine those two. Let's make everything work together as one. So as an example, I'm going to give you as a model of how this has worked. We are establishing something very, very similar, almost identical to this in Minnesota now for the swine industry, modeled on this. This is to give you something to think about and possibly talk about at lunchtime with your colleagues. So I'd also like to acknowledge that the industry and incident command partnership and who participated in this and who provided their input after 2015 to be able to give this information and hopefully guide you as you encourage or participate in this type of program at home. Dr. Michele Kromm, who works for Hormel, she was part of Jennie-O Turkey Store, It was the 2015 outbreak became so large so quickly, it was an all hands on deck situation. All hazards, as Marie has pointed out, and Mike Starkey as well. The good relationship between the Minnesota Board of Animal Health, industry, and size of the outbreak broke down barriers. Okay? What I want to talk to you about is the relationship that Minnesota had already before HIPATH hit of these groups. So why? Why is this even important? Why do you want to spend the time going to another meeting, having another conference call? There are questions that Incident Command needs help answering that industry is going to provide those answers for. The Board of Animal Health reached out to the industry as a result of an ongoing relationship with the avian program in Minnesota. There has been salmonella issues. There have been low pathogenic avian influenza. There's been a long-standing relationship with industry and the Board of Animal Health in Minnesota because of these other diseases. Trust. We all have to trust each other in order to have success, right? I'm not going to go down that road, but I was going to talk about doing the trust fall, falling backwards. Industry needs to be able to support the Board of Animal Health. The Board of Animal Health needs to be able to catch the industry as well. So pre-engage with the industry. Who's who? Who has those relationships that we can rely on? Those trusted relationships are not going to happen overnight. They need to be built over the years, over different scenarios, over different situations, and those long-term relationships will be able to help provide those high yields of transparency that your producers are going to be looking for, as well as anybody else involved in that response of the disease. Most importantly, these relationships need to exist before an outbreak. Peacetime. That's what we're going to call this right now. We're really ramping up. I sit on those phone calls every Wednesday morning with Marie about an ASF preparedness plan. We are building those relationships now before they absolutely have to happen. We're learning whose strengths, who has what strengths, who has what networks that they can tap into should we need to provide different types of resources. We are building that network here in Minnesota now before we have to. So how does something like this happen? How do we set up this network and these relationships? So during HIPATH, the Incident Command and the industry group met for 2 hours, 3 times a week, face to face. Very important. You need to be able to watch the facial expressions, the body language. If somebody's really quiet and they're tense, you can ask them, do you not agree with this? Is there a different approach we should take instead? These face-to-face interactions are extremely important. They happened twice a week, as I mentioned, over the course of the outbreak at Command Central, which happened to be in Willmar, Minnesota. The basic agenda included what's happening. Let's all get on the same page. What's going well? Why? Is there anything to address on how to even improve that further? What's going poorly? How can we address that issue? How can we resolve it so that at the next meeting in 3 or 4 days, we can put that in the what's going well column? And a discussion of future actions. These meetings are what was key to helping move the response along. Who should really all be involved in something like this? In Minnesota, we had 3 poultry vets. Our commodity representative, it was the former executive director of the Minnesota Turkey Growers and the Chicken and Egg Association of Minnesota. One of our Board of Animal Health avian program regulators, our 2 incident commanders, and our operations chiefs. So those that were representing industry were our veterinarians, one from the turkey industry, one from the layer, was represented by a veterinarian, but we had no broiler representation. Our broiler industry, plain and simple, our broilers are raised quickly. 6 weeks, and they ship out. So the broiler industry was just, they were kind of doing the, how did you phrase it, Carol? Early marketing, so then they had empty barns and they were no susceptible populations. The commodity representative speaks for all poultry groups, as I mentioned. He was the executive director for both the chicken industry and the turkey industry, so he is already paid to have that voice. One other thing I want to talk about here is by asking these people to be included on a committee like this, they may or may not work for a company. In particular, one of our veterinarians who served on this committee is an independent veterinarian, and she serves those independent producers. So as some of the unwritten recommendations, we would actually suggest that maybe there's a jury duty type pay to serve on a committee like this. She was giving up her time and her time with her clientele to be able to attend these meetings and provide input. So to be able to provide her a little bit of income because of that time and participation would be something to consider. One of the recommendations through this group is to keep this committee small but mighty, because if it's too big, there's going to be too many chiefs, too many opinions, action won't happen. So keep it small but mighty with the members of that group. These people also need to be decision makers. That goes for the mighty part, right? Face-to-face was important. I've already touched on that concept. And to provide an orientation. That's one thing that they would have appreciated prior to the start of this actual committee. So like at their very first meeting during the outbreak, an orientation of to what is their expectations, what is each individual member's role, go through the syllabus sort of a thing, have an orientation at that first meeting so that they all knew, again, we're on the same page. That goes with communication. So what? What did they actually do? This is going to go with their protocols for biosecurity. It's also going to go with continuity of business. What are they allowed to do if they are in the control area? There's already processes in place if they're in a control zone. Basically, if you're going to ship in or out of, there's processes in place. They are governed by those standard operating procedures. The industry vets could provide information and input to the regulatory agencies about how that was actually happening. Different age birds, through a functional exercise last spring, moving piglets to a finishing farm within a system. How does that work? What if they're on the edge of a control area and they're moving into a control area, but they have to move the pigs out of that? It's a big ball of worms, to be frank. So the industry veterinarians were able to provide that kind of real applied, this is what our actual needs are for the industry, to the regulatory agencies who they're not practicing that every day. So it may have slipped their mind that that's how this system is working. What did the industry do? Further with the industry vets, because poultry is an integrated industry similar to swine, they served as processing subject matter experts as well as liaisons to those processing. They provided an in-process check on the response. What's happening? How is our system functioning? What could regulators help to do to help their system along better through this whole thing? They translated response goals to actionable items for farms. That's what's key. What can the farms do that's actionable to help mitigate and stamp out that disease as quick as possible? I see Tim standing already. What did the commodity representative do? His goal was communication. He connected with legislators, state and federal policymakers, the media, and the growers themselves. What else did regulatory agencies do? You have to continue to feel the pulse of the industry. There has to be an advocate for the continued industry existence within the incident command. That's where that communication between the industry and the regulators can really work. They have to have that pulse. And if they're in incident command for weeks on end, how are they going to get their finger on that pulse? The regulators will also help advocate for disease elimination and control strategies. That's their job in this process. They'll help establish this group as peers and as equals. Everybody's coming to the table with the same goal in mind. And the regulators, Dr. Thompson, that's your job, right? To help make sure everybody's on the same page. We can all feel welcome at that table and really work for the same goal. And the regulators will also prepare the industry to be able to interact with regulators and to help them understand and address expectations. This is where my role in extension is coming to play, where hopefully then now we can go to producers and say, okay, this is how it's going to work. There's nothing to be afraid of. We've got your back. So the 2015 Stakeholder Incident Command Group arose as a result of an immediate need because of that long-standing relationship that already existed. They would like an orientation, however, which I already mentioned. To a person, they recommend that these groups arise purposefully. So each person, each individual needs to come to that table and to recognize the need and the advantage for the approach that this group is going to be taking. Put a box in the incident command chart. You'll see this. Right now, this box doesn't always exist. So have industry have a seat at the table. And individuals who have a seat at this table should be in a position on the incident command and should thus be paid. With that pay, you can without pay, you may exclude people who could be really valuable with their contributions. Like I talked earlier of the one poultry vet who wasn't independent. She was giving up her income and her time in order to serve on this. So if there was sort of a jury duty type pay, that would maybe entice her to say, yes, I will contribute my time and efforts. Put these interactions in the daily schedule in incident command. Make sure that it's part of that incident command structure and that it can take a priority when that time comes for that meeting. All hands are on deck and the communication can actually happen. I'm going to skip over that. I know it's super important. Specific rules. Intensive production systems, such as the swine industry here, have a commodity representative. Industry practice subject matter experts, and processing subject matter experts. Those are the individuals that are going to come from industry. Individuals that are going to come from the regulatory agencies, disease and practice expertise, as well as incident command. When there's extensive production systems, you should probably also include your wildlife agencies. Okay? What about the feral swine populations? Are you including your DNR and your wildlife services individuals at the table in your incident command as well? Dr. Kromm also mentioned recalcitrant people should work with extension and other industry. Okay, that's where me and my colleagues come in, is extension. There's a whole other population, especially when it's going to come to something like ASF or even FMD. There's a population of people who aren't going to know what the heck's going on. So who are they going to come to? They're going to come to their county agent, right? Okay. Anybody from the South, or are you all from the Midwest? Anybody from the South? Well, Stefan. Okay. So in the South, they're still called county agents, and every county still has one. In the Midwest, we are getting spread a little bit more thin. In Minnesota, there's only 20 agriculture agents for all 87 counties. But still, those 4-H families, those hobby farmers, those niche markets, they're going to come to their county extension office to ask those questions. So that's where extension can come in to and have a seat at the table. So the definition of a stakeholder also includes those who do not or cannot participate in the response. These include racing pigeons, was an issue during high-path avian influenza. People who have show pigs, sheep, farm cervids, fighting cocks, hobby and backyard livestock and poultry. These are all stakeholders who need to have some type of communication available to them during an outbreak. They can consume the resources of incident command, possibly through another party, such as extension. Smallholders of animal species will be numerous, and they may have wide characteristics. Okay? I typically don't handle backyard poultry owners because they are very different personalities than those of commercial poultry. If you are a veterinarian in a mixed practice or in a small town, you probably understand what I'm talking about. I'm getting a lot of glazed over eyes, okay? Those birds are considered pets. They're not considered a commodity. So they have very different emotional connections to those birds, so we have to handle and explain things differently to them. So there's those types of audiences that need to be served as well. So strategy to reach these difficult stakeholders, broadcasting messages, rely on extension, university, we can help deliver those messages. Prepare to think outside of your box when having to deal and respond with foreign animal disease. Communicating with non-participatory stakeholders presents different challenges. There's going to be language barriers. There'll be cultural barriers. They may not the Hmong community is not a written language, so handing them a fact sheet in Hmong probably is not going to be your best mode of communicating information to that population. Who is the best to communicate with some of those other populations? As an incident command or your emergency management committee, those are those things that you need to decide during peacetime and ahead of time. So in conclusion, when there are opportunities to work on your goals collectively, take them. If you're not participating in something like this right now in your state, help initiate that. Take initiative, get something working on in order to get that jump started right now before we absolutely have to. Practice teamwork in livestock industries. If those of you are participating in the S-Sphere exercise next week, that's a really great opportunity to be able to practice some of those things within your system, within your county, within your area. Effective and efficient responses need the input of stakeholders and regulators. Enlist other resources to help engage non-participatory agencies. That's going to be my nemesis for the day. Identify who they are. How can you speak to them? Finally, what's super important, we have a huge initiative in Minnesota right now. Communicating the industry during an emergency also needs to include that as regulators, as an industry, we care about those producers. There needs to be an importance put on mental health. There are going to be veterinarians, there are going to be producers, there's going to be family members that as a disease outbreak progresses, that stress is going to start hit them. And cities and economies are going to start downgrading. Veterinarians, incident command personnel are going to start being overstretched with their emotional capacity as well as their physical capacities. So don't forget about this key element of your emergency response. Responders in an emergency need training in dealing with people in crisis. Also bring in your county emergency planners. Okay? There's also another initiative going on right now at the state of Minnesota about connecting emergency managers from each county into these types of systems.